I think there's something interesting that I'm going to try to put my finger on in these readings today. This is from 1 Samuel. When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me about the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So David gave his oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. I hadn't really noticed this before. By the way, this episode is repeated again in a different way in a few verses. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Is Saul also among the prophets? They asked. Well, here he prophesies, or he shows that he gets it. Despite his paranoia and his jealousy and his growing insanity, despite the envy that consumes him and makes him seek out David, and David has to live like a fugitive on the run, he calls him his son. And when David spares him, his heart breaks and he weeps. And he realizes that David is the favored of the Lord and will become king. He sees that even in the midst of his sin, and even in the midst of his pain and his worldly obsession. He sees the truth in spite of that, at least for a moment. But there's more. Okay. Let's take a look at what happens in Isaiah. People may bring you the wealth of nations, their kings led in triumphal procession. And later, the children of your oppressors will come bowing before you. All who desire you will bow down at your feet. This is God talking to his people who are still in captivity and promising them a tremendous victory. They will not only inhabit their own lands again and no longer be in exile, but all the nations will come and bow to them. The people of Israel will be, in a way, the leading kingdom on earth. But does this literally happen? Interestingly, when do the nations come and bow? When is a representative of Israel given the wealth of nations and great gifts? The visit of the wise men, the visit of the Magi, who represent all of these various other nations coming to give honor and obeisance to baby Jesus. This prophecy is fulfilled, at least partially, in that hidden moment that Herod never knew of, although he suspected something was going on. If you lived at the time that this was being written, Deutero Isaiah, and you were in captivity, and you hear that God is promising his people that all nations will bow before them, you wouldn't think that ultimately it would mean this scene that we know from Epiphany, from the Christmas season. You wouldn't think it would be great magicians or wise men or kings bowing before a helpless baby. who represents all of the people of God and who himself was Jewish, but who, of course, isn't recognized as a king or the King of Kings throughout his life, but instead is persecuted and crucified. But in the same way that Saul recognized that David was to be the true king of Israel, so perhaps even in the midst of their suffering, the people of God are given a truth that they can't imagine how it will play out, but that there will be an eternal reign of Israel. The people of God will somehow be at the top of the pyramid. Not Jews as Jews, but the King of the Jews as the King of Kings. And finally, the author of the book of Hebrews wraps up chapter 11, or comes close. And he talks about these heroes of the faith. These all died in faith, everyone he's listed in the past few readings. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them and embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned, but now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city, the New Jerusalem, although he doesn't call it that. In other words, and there's a kind of poetic, visionary opening in these lines. Here in Hebrews, we're kind of hearing about what we're reading in the other readings. And the people, the Jews who are in exile during the time of second Isaiah, they're not just thinking of returning to the country, for if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. They're not just going to return to what was the original promised land, but a greater promised land. For now they desire a better country, a heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. And even Saul, in all of his sinfulness and anger, catches a glimpse of this. In his love for David and in his vision of the fact that David not only will become king, but as we know, although Saul doesn't quite see this, David's line is the line that includes Jesus, the king that will reign forever. I think we make mistakes when we think that the promises of God are merely materialistic and that we can envision them. Because as I say, there would be no envisioning the visit of the three kings. And there's no real way to put into words that are not poetic what the author of the epistle to the Hebrews is trying to say. We are strangers and sojourners, strangers and pilgrims. This is not our home. We seek not our own country, our own fatherland, our own plot of ground. We seek something beyond, something that only God can give us. And we catch glimpses of it here. And his promises to us are maybe not literally angels on clouds playing harps, but maybe something that we can only really sense in between the lines of these readings and in beautiful music or great poetry. I think that's kind of what's going on in these readings today.